The Aurelian Empire was built upon strength. From the shining towers of their capital to the endless training fields of their soldiers, every stone and every scar told the same story. That power ruled all. The Aurelians believed themselves to be born for command. They were taller than humans, faster, and blessed with luminous skin that shimmered under the twin suns. Their voices carried authority, and their history was a chain of victories stretching back thousands of years. When the humans arrived among the stars, the Aurelians expected them to bow as so many other younger races had done. But humanity, though small in number and lacking in size, did not bow. They offered friendship instead of surrender, diplomacy instead of pride. That was how Thomas, a human diplomat from Earth, came to the Aurelian capital of Solara Prime. He was not a soldier. He carried no armor, no weapon, and no visible sign of power, only his words and a calmness that few could understand. The Aurelian High Council saw opportunity in his arrival. The humans were spreading fast through nearby sectors, and alliances mattered. So the council proposed a symbolic union, a marriage between an Aurelian and a human, meant to bind their two races in trust and shared purpose. When the name Mira, a decorated Aurelian warrior, was chosen for the union, the announcement echoed through the empire. Mira had been born on the battlefield. She had trained since childhood with energy blades, commanded her first squad before she was 20, and earned her title as Steel of Solara. Her arms were strong, her voice sharp, and her loyalty unshakable. So when she was told she would marry a human diplomat, a man who had never fought, never trained, and never even worn armor, she was silent for a long time. Her mother, a general, said gently, "You do not have to love him, Mira. You only have to represent the empire." Mira nodded. Duty came first. Feelings were secondary. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man this Thomas would be. The first time Mira saw him, he was standing under the silver banners of the Aurelian Hall, surrounded by glowing symbols of unity. He looked out of place among the tall, radiant Aurelians. He was shorter, plainer, his hair dark and his eyes thoughtful. When he saw her, he smiled, not nervously, not proudly, but sincerely. "Lady Mira," he said, bowing slightly, "it's an honor to meet my future wife." His voice was calm, almost gentle. Mira studied him for a moment. There was no fear in his eyes, but also no arrogance, only a strange, quiet confidence. "You are smaller than I expected," she said bluntly. He chuckled softly. "Humans usually are. But we make up for it in persistence." That answer caught her off guard. Most would have stumbled or tried to impress her with words. But Thomas seemed perfectly at ease with himself. The ceremony that followed was grand, filled with light and sound. The High Council stood tall as the vows were spoken. The human and Aurelian flags joined together in holographic brilliance. Thomas and Mira exchanged the ceremonial rings, his a simple metal band, hers a thin circle of living light. When the final vow was completed, the hall erupted in cheers. To the Empire, this was more than a marriage, it was a statement that humanity and the Aurelians would stand side by side. But for Mira, it was the beginning of confusion. Life in the Aurelian capital was intense. The soldiers trained from dawn until dusk, their strength enhanced by gravity chambers and pulse drills. Mira's days were filled with sparring and strategy sessions. She had expected Thomas to stay out of the way, perhaps spend his time in libraries or among other diplomats. Yet every morning she found him in the training grounds, not fighting, but watching. He sat quietly at the edge, taking notes, asking polite questions. One morning, after seeing him for the third time that week, she approached him, curious and a little annoyed. "You come here every day," she said. "You watch us train, but you never join. Why?" Thomas looked up from his tablet. "Because I like to learn how things work," he said. "Every movement tells a story, not just of muscle, but of thought." "Thought?" Mira repeated with disbelief. "Combat is instinct, strength, reflex." He shook his head slightly. "And yet every fighter I've watched hesitates at the same moment, just before striking. That means even strength has doubt. Mira frowned. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Most Aurelians believed humans couldn't even understand their level of warfare, but this human seemed to see more than most. Still, she dismissed his words. He was just curious. And soft. That was all. A week later, Thomas was invited to a feast held by Aurelian officers. Mira attended with him, wearing her ceremonial armor. The feast was grand, filled with laughter and pride. But as soon as Thomas entered the hall, the whispers began. "Is that the human husband?" one officer murmured. "He looks fragile," another said. "Can he even hold a blade?" Mira felt, her jaw tighten, but Thomas only smiled politely as he took his seat. One of the younger officers, bold and arrogant, stood up. He lifted an energy blade, its glowing edge humming with restrained power. "Perhaps the human wishes to prove himself," he said mockingly. "A single lift will do. Let us see the strength of Earth." The room filled with laughter. Even Mira looked at Thomas, unsure what he would do. Thomas rose slowly. "May I?" he asked, walking to the front. He reached for the weapon. It was designed for Aurelian hands, large, heavy, powered by energy resonance that humans weren't trained to control. He gripped the handle carefully, studying it. The weapon trembled slightly in his hand. The energy hum flickered. For a moment, the blade glowed brighter, and then dimmed again. Thomas gently set it back down. "I suppose that answers your question," the officer said, smirking, but Thomas only nodded. "It does. Thank you for letting me try." His calmness disarmed the tension in the air. There was no anger, no humiliation. He simply returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. Later that night, in their private quarters, Mira confronted him. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" she demanded. "They insulted you in front of everyone." Thomas looked up from the data pad he was reading. His eyes were steady, not defensive. "Because words can't hurt me," he said. "And I learn more by listening than shouting." Mira stared at him. His answer was simple, but it struck something inside her. "Do you even care what they think?" she asked finally. He smiled faintly. "Of course I do, but I care more about understanding them. The Aurelians value strength because that's what kept them alive. Humans value adaptation because that's what kept us alive. Maybe both are right." For the first time since their marriage, Mira had no reply. She simply stood there, unsure whether to feel irritated or impressed. As the days turned into weeks, Mira began to notice small things about Thomas. He woke before dawn, reading through Aurelian war records. He studied ancient weapon designs, holograms of battle formations, and combat philosophy. Sometimes she caught him trying to mimic sword stances in their quarters, awkwardly, but with steady focus. When she asked him about it, he said, "If I understand your ways, I can understand you." It was a strange thing to hear from a diplomat, or from anyone. Slowly, Mira's irritation began to fade. She still thought him weak, but she also saw something she couldn't name. Resolve, maybe. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Thomas stood beside her on the balcony overlooking Solera Prime. The sky burned orange and silver, reflecting off the metal spires of the city. "You don't belong here," she said quietly. He smiled. "Perhaps, but sometimes not belonging gives you a better view of the truth." She looked at him then. Really looked. His body might have been frail compared to hers, but his eyes held an unshakable steadiness. It wasn't the strength of warriors. It was the strength of someone who had faced the universe with nothing but his will, and survived. Mira didn't understand it yet, but something deep inside her began to shift. The Aurelian Empire had always believed humans were fragile. Mira herself had believed that from the beginning. But every word Thomas spoke, every calm action he took, chipped away at that belief. She still saw him as weak, but no longer with contempt. It was now with curiosity. Because somewhere inside, that quiet man was a strength she could not yet see, a strength that would soon change everything. The weeks after the wedding passed slowly for Mira. She tried to adjust to this strange new life, a life of politics, diplomacy, and endless ceremonies. It was not the life of a soldier. There were no battles to win, no missions to complete, and no enemies to face. Instead, there were meetings, speeches, and smiling faces hiding sharp intentions. Tomas, however, seemed to move through all of it with quiet ease. He listened more than he spoke. He greeted everyone with respect, even those who mocked him. He remembered every name, every small detail. His calm presence made people underestimate him, and somehow that worked in his favor. Mira didn't understand it. Among her people, silence was weakness. To her, power was meant to be shown, not hidden. Still, she found herself watching him more often. The way he handled tension with a few soft words. The way he diffused conflict by simply refusing to be provoked. It was strange. It was almost human. One evening, an invitation arrived from the Aurelian High Command. It was for a feast of unity, held to celebrate the success of the alliance between humans and Aurelians. It was not just a dinner. It was a test. Every major officer, noble, and scholar would attend. The event would determine how the Empire truly saw this marriage, whether as a sign of strength or a sign of weakness. Mira received the message with mixed feelings. "I suppose we should go," she said, glancing at Thomas as he read through another old Aurelian war record. He looked up and smiled. "Of course. It will be good to see how your people celebrate victory." "They don't celebrate," she said dryly. "They compete, even at dinner." Thomas laughed softly. "Then I'll try not to lose." His calm tone only deepened her worry. The grand hall of Solara shone brighter than ever that night. Its high crystal ceiling reflected the twin moons, and golden banners of the Aurelian Empire lined the walls. Music hummed low and powerful, like the heartbeat of the city itself. The guests were already gathered when Mira and Thomas arrived. Every eye turned toward them, some curious, some cold, some amused. Mira walked tall, dressed in ceremonial silver armor. Thomas wore a formal diplomatic robe of dark blue. With gold trimming, simple yet dignified, a murmur moved through the crowd as they took their seats near the center. "That is the human husband," someone whispered. "So small," another said. "I heard he can't even lift a training sword." Mira's jaw tightened, but she kept silent. Tomas, as always, seemed unbothered. He greeted each person politely, even those who clearly disapproved of him. He listened to their remarks with patient eyes, responding only with a gentle smile. It both irritated and impressed her. As the feast continued, conversation turned from politics to power, as it always did among Aurelians. A general raised his glass and said proudly, "No force in this galaxy matches our strength. Even the humans must admire what we have built." Another officer laughed. "Admirable, yes, but fragile creatures cannot build empires like ours." A wave of laughter filled the table. Mira's fingers curled around her cup. She wanted to speak, but Thomas gently touched her hand, signaling her to stay calm. Then one of the younger officers, proud, sharp-tongued, and known for testing limits, stood. His name was Raylan. He lifted a gleaming energy blade from the rack behind him and said, loud enough for all to hear, "Perhaps the human would like to see what true strength feels like." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned toward Thomas. Raylan held out the weapon. Its blade glowed faintly blue, the energy humming through the air like a living thing. "Come, human," Raylan said with a mocking smile. "Show us your courage, lift it." "If you can," Mira froze. Her heart beat faster. She wanted to stand, to stop this foolish display. But before she could, Thomas rose from his seat. He didn't look angry or afraid. His expression was thoughtful, even curious. "If it pleases you," he said politely, walking toward the officer. He reached out and wrapped his hand around the handle of the blade. The energy pulsed sharply in response, reacting to the unfamiliar human touch. The weapon was heavy, far heavier than any normal sword. It required not only strength but also control over energy resonance, something humans were not trained to handle. For a few moments, Thomas simply held it. The blade shimmered, then flickered as if uncertain whether to accept him. He lifted it slowly. The hum grew louder, unstable. The blue light sputtered and dimmed again. The room filled with laughter. One of the nobles leaned back in amusement. "See, even their tools reject them," Raylan smirked. A pity. I had hoped the human could at least lift a blade. Mira's fists clenched at her side, but Thomas only smiled. He looked at the weapon one more time, adjusted his grip, and nodded slightly, as if he had just learned something important. Then he carefully placed the blade back on the table. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's an impressive weapon." His calmness silenced the laughter for a second. It was not the reaction anyone expected. Raylan frowned. "That's it? No defense? No excuse?" Thomas shook his head. "Why would I need one? I came here to learn, not to compete." Then he turned and walked back to his seat beside Mira. The feast continued, but the mood had changed. The Aurelians still laughed, but it sounded more uncertain now. Some whispered that the human was either foolish or fearless. They couldn't decide which. Mira, however, sat quietly, her thoughts spinning. When they returned to their quarters that night, she couldn't hold back her frustration. "Why did you let them humiliate you?" she demanded. "You could have refused. You could have walked away." Thomas set down his robe and looked at her calmly. "And what would that have proved? That I am afraid of them?" "You looked weak," she said sharply. "They'll never respect you now." He smiled faintly. "Respect is earned in different ways, Mira. Your people respect power. Mine respect patience." "Patience?" she repeated. "What use is patience in front of an enemy?" He looked at her for a moment before replying. "Sometimes patience is the weapon that wins the war before it begins." Mira frowned, not understanding. Thomas turned away and poured himself a glass of water. "Your people train to control their bodies," he said quietly. "Humans train to control their minds. Both take strength, just different kinds." His words lingered in the air. The next day, Thomas did something unexpected. He returned to the training grounds, the same place where the soldiers had mocked him before. But this time, he didn't come to watch. He asked the master instructor, an older Aurelian named Vara, if he could learn. The soldiers nearby chuckled, thinking it was a joke. But Vara saw something in Thomas's eyes, something steady, and agreed. Mira heard about it later that day and came to see for herself. When she arrived, Thomas was standing in the sparring ring holding a practice blade. It was much lighter than the real energy sword, but still heavy for a human. He swung it awkwardly at first, his movements slow and uncertain. The soldiers laughed quietly among themselves, but Thomas didn't stop. Hour after hour, he practiced the same simple strikes again and again. Sweat covered his face, his hands trembled, but he kept going. Mira stood at the edge, watching silently. Later, as the sun set, Vara approached her and said softly, "Your husband may not be strong now, but he learns faster than anyone I've seen." Mira didn't answer. She just watched Thomas fall to one knee, exhausted, then stand again without complaint. That night, when he returned home covered in dust, she handed him a towel without a word. "You're training now?" she asked after a moment. He nodded. "I realize that understanding isn't enough. Sometimes you have to feel the weight of what you study." She looked at him, puzzled. "You think you can match an Aurelian warrior with human strength?" He smiled slightly. "No. But maybe strength isn't the only thing that matters." For the first time, Mira had no reply. She looked at him, this quiet, stubborn human, and something shifted again inside her. She still didn't think he was strong, but she was starting to believe that he might be something else, and something her people didn't yet understand. The days that followed changed everything. Word spread through the barracks that the human diplomat trained daily. Some mocked him, but others began to watch in silence. There was something strangely captivating about his persistence. He never complained, never bragged. He simply trained, studied, and improved, one step at a time. Mira started to visit the training grounds more often. She told herself she was there to supervise, but deep down she wanted to see how far he would go. Sometimes she corrected his stance. Sometimes she just stood and watched. And slowly she began to realize that her laughter had faded. The mockery of others no longer sounded so amusing. Because every day Thomas trained, his patience carved a quiet strength into him. A strength that even she could feel. And somewhere deep inside, though she wouldn't admit it yet, Mira began to wonder if her people had been wrong about humans all along. The Aurelian Empire had known peace for nearly 20 years. The stars around Solera Prime shone calm and bright. Trade ships crossed between worlds, and the alliance with humanity seemed stronger every day. But peace in the galaxy was always fragile, like glass under pressure. And one night it cracked. It began with a single message. A coded distress signal came from Outpost Lyra, an Aurelian colony near the border of the Vorn Syndicate, a ruthless power known for conquest and piracy. The message was short and broken by static. Attack. Vorn ships. Shields down. Then silence. When the Council heard the report, fear spread quickly. The Vorn Syndicate had violated their treaty. If left unanswered, it would mean war. Within hours, the capital was filled with alarms and movement. Soldiers rushed through the corridors, commanders shouted orders, and ships prepared for defense. Mira stood in the war chamber with other officers, her armor gleaming under the emergency lights. She had been called to duty again, finally. But this time she felt torn. Her husband, Thomas, stood at the far side of the room among the diplomats and analysts. He wasn't there as a warrior, but as a voice for reason. When he looked at her, his eyes held worry, not fear. "Will you go?" he asked quietly. "I must," she said. "The outpost is under attack." "It is my duty," he nodded slowly. "Then it's my duty to make sure we understand why it happened." Mira frowned. "Understanding won't stop their weapons." Thomas's voice was calm as always. "Maybe not. But misunderstanding will start a war we cannot end." His words sounded wise, but she didn't share his hope. The Vorn were not the kind to negotiate. They respected strength, nothing else. Still, when she left for the starport that night, Thomas was there, watching her ship lift off into the dark. His figure grew smaller through the viewport, but his eyes stayed in her mind. Arrival at the outpost 2 days later. Mira's transport reached Outpost Lyra. What she saw made her heart tighten. The once busy colony was in ruins. Buildings smoldered. Smoke rose into the thin atmosphere, and wounded soldiers lay among broken machinery. The sky flickered with distant lightning from Vorn plasma storms. Her team began rescue operations at once. The enemy had already retreated, but signs of their attack were everywhere. Scorch marks, shattered armor, and empty supply vaults. While others focused on repairs, Mira searched for answers. She found a surviving officer, weak, injured, but alive. "They didn't want supplies," he whispered. "They were looking for something." "For what?" she asked. He coughed, struggling to speak. "Something human, a device. Brought here last month by trade convoy." Mira froze. "A human device? What could be so important that the Vorn would risk war to get it?" She sent the report immediately to Solara Prime. Hours later, a reply came from Thomas. "Do not destroy or move the human device until I arrive. It may be connected to something greater." She couldn't believe it. "Thomas, this is a war zone," she said through the hollow channel. "You can't come here." But his voice was steady. "I have to. If the Vorn attacked for this reason, I need to understand it. Trust me." She hesitated. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. The unexpected arrival. 3 days later, a small human shuttle landed at the outpost. Thomas stepped out wearing a reinforced field suit instead of his usual diplomat robes. His eyes looked tired but determined. Mira met him at the landing pad. "You shouldn't have come," she said firmly. "Neither should war," he replied quietly. Despite her frustration, she felt an odd sense of relief seeing him. Even in the middle of destruction, his calmness steadied her. Together, they walked to the underground storage vault where the mysterious device was kept. It was small, no larger than a human chest, and covered in layers of protective casing. When Thomas saw it, his face went pale. "This isn't a weapon," he said. "It's a prototype, something from an old human project. It was supposed to be lost." "What kind of project?" Mira asked. He touched the side of the container, reading the faint symbols engraved there. "A resonance core," he murmured. "A fusion of thought and energy. The design could power weapons, or heal worlds, but it reacts to the mind of the one who wields it." Mira stared at him. "So the Vorn wanted it to make themselves stronger?" "Yes," Thomas said grimly. "And now that they know where it is, they'll come again." As if to prove his words, the ground suddenly shook. The outpost alarm blared. Enemy ships were entering orbit. The second assault within minutes, the skies above Outpost Lyra burned with red trails of plasma fire. The Vorn fleet had returned, larger and faster than before. Mira rushed to the command post. "All units, defensive formation. Protect the core at all costs. Thomas stayed beside her, helping coordinate signals. He was no soldier, but his quick thinking and calm logic kept the officers focused. Explosions rocked the base. The shield generators flickered. Enemy landing pods began to crash onto the surface, unleashing armored troops. Mira grabbed her blade and helmet. "Stay here," she told him. "If they break through, seal the vault and destroy the device." He met her gaze. "I won't let them take it." "I'm serious, Thomas." "So am I," he said softly. There was something different in his voice. Stronger, sharper. She didn't have time to question it. She ran out to the front lines, leading the defense. Plasma bolts flashed through the smoky air. The Aurelians fought fiercely, but the Vorn pressed harder, their mechanical suits crushing through walls. Mira's sword glowed as she cut through enemy after enemy, her movements precise and deadly. But the Vorn were too many. Slowly they pushed toward the command vault, the sword and the light inside the vault. Thomas worked quickly. The power was failing, the doors trembling from impact. He turned to the resonance core, its containment lights flickering. He whispered, "You were made by human hands. You'll listen to them again." He removed the outer shield casing carefully. Inside was a glowing crystal sphere, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. As he touched it, the light flared. The energy jumped between his fingers, wrapping his hand in golden light. The door burst open behind him. Vorn soldiers stormed in, their weapons raised. Before they could fire, a blinding flash filled the room. The resonance core reacted, projecting streams of light that twisted and merged and forming into a shape. A blade, not metal, but pure energy. A sword of living light. Thomas stood in silence, staring at it. The weapon pulsed gently, waiting, as if asking for purpose. He reached out and grasped it. The air around him vibrated. For the first time, the power didn't reject him. It obeyed. Outside, Mira was cornered near the command path when a brilliant golden light cut through the smoke. She turned and froze. Thomas walked toward her, the energy sword in his hand glowing like a small sun. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his steps. The Vorn soldiers fired at him, but the light around him bent and twisted, deflecting the blasts. With each swing, arcs of energy sliced through armored enemies like paper. Mira stared, disbelief flooding her. The same man who once struggled to lift a training blade now moved with precision and calm grace. The sword in his hand wasn't just a weapon. It was an extension of his mind, his will. He reached her side. "You said understanding doesn't stop weapons," he said quietly. "Let's see if it can guide one." Together they fought, her silver blade flashing, his golden sword singing through the air. The Vorn began to retreat, their ranks broken by the strange power they couldn't understand. The aftermath. When the last enemy ship fled into orbit, the battlefield fell silent. Ash drifted in the air. The light from Tomas's sword faded slowly until only a faint glow remained. Mira turned to him. "How did you—" He looked down at the sword, then back at her. It wasn't strength. It was connection. The weapon responds to intent, not muscle. She shook her head, still stunned. "You shouldn't have been able to control it." He smiled softly. "Maybe the core recognized something human. The same patience you once called weakness." Mira felt her chest tighten. All her life she had believed strength was measured by power, by battle, by dominance. But now she saw a different kind of strength. Quiet, thoughtful, and yet unshakable. Tomas wasn't a warrior by training, yet he had stood where others would have fallen. Later, when the Aurelian reinforcements arrived, they found the outpost secured and the human standing beside their greatest warrior. The High Council would later write that a human defended Aurelian ground with nothing but his will and a blade of light. But for Mira, the story meant something deeper. As she stood beside Thomas, watching the sunrise over the broken outpost, she finally spoke. "I was wrong about you," she said quietly. He looked at her and smiled. "I never needed to be right about anything. I just needed time." And as the light of dawn touched the ruins, Mira realized that humanity's true strength was not in its weapons, but in its heart. A heart that refused to surrender, no matter the odds. The dawn over Outpost Lyra was quiet but tense. Smoke from the previous battle still curled in the thin atmosphere, and scorched earth marked the path of destruction left by the Vorn Syndicate. Yet amidst the ruin, the survivors were alive. And that meant hope. Mira stood on the command platform, her silver blade sheathed, but her eyes sharp. She surveyed the damage, counting soldiers, supplies, and the remaining defenses. Though the immediate danger had passed, the air still felt charged with the threat of another strike. Beside her, Thomas walked calmly. The solar edge, the energy sword born from the human resonance core, held steadily in his hand. Its golden light pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat, a silent reminder of the power that humans could wield when underestimated. Mira glanced at him, still struggling to reconcile the image of this quiet human with the unstoppable figure who had turned the tide of battle just hours ago. I still don't understand it, she admitted. Thomas smiled faintly. You will. Strength isn't always visible. Some of it is resonance, connection, understanding, and sometimes courage. She shook her head. Courage? He had risked coming here without training in combat. Yet the sword responded to him as if it had been made for his hands. The aftermath of the first battle. The soldiers of the outpost were tired but inspired. Many had trained their whole lives to fight Aurelians, and now they had witnessed a human standing in the center of the battlefield, wielding a weapon that was not just strong but alive. Some approached Thomas cautiously. You fought with the blade, one soldier said, awe in his voice. It obeyed you. It did, Thomas admitted. But it's not just the blade. It responds to thought, patience, focus. The Vorn underestimated all of it, especially the human mind. The soldiers looked at him, unsure whether to respect or fear him. Mira, however, stepped forward. She rested a hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that she now saw his strength. It was the first time she realized she had judged him too harshly. She had seen his calmness as weakness, but now it was a quiet power, more formidable than raw strength. The Vorn strike continues. Before anyone could celebrate, a new threat emerged. The Vorn syndicate was relentless. Reports came in that enemy reinforcements were approaching from multiple vectors, faster and deadlier than before. Mira tightened her armor. They won't stop. They will come back with everything they have. Thomas nodded, examining the energy patterns of the solar edge. Then we must prepare not just to defend, but to anticipate. The weapon responds to thought. If we think ahead, we can guide it, Mira raised an eyebrow. Guide it? Yes, the solar edge reacts to mind and intent. Strength alone is not enough. It sings when it is understood. She didn't fully understand, but there was something in the way he handled the weapon. A quiet confidence, a connection that went beyond muscle and reflex. She realized that his calm patience had been a kind of strength all along. Training in the midst of chaos, over the next few days the outpost became both a fortress and a classroom. Thomas trained alongside Mira and the soldiers, learning to channel the energy of the solar edge. At first it was awkward. The blade was unpredictable, responding to his thoughts in ways that made it dance in the air. But Thomas did not give up. He spent hours practicing, moving slowly, learning how to anticipate the weapon's reactions. Mira watched him, sometimes correcting his stance, sometimes letting him work through it on his own. She began to notice pattern, subtle movements, quiet decisions that allowed him to master the sword without the brute force that Aurelians relied on. You move differently, Mira said one evening as they practiced under the glow of twin moons. Aurelian warriors rely on strength, speed, and aggression. You let the weapon lead you. Thomas smiled faintly. It is not about forcing it. It is about listening. Mira shook her head, half in disbelief and half in admiration. She had grown up believing that weakness was a flaw. Now she realized that the human way of understanding, patience, calculation, focus, could surpass even the mightiest of warriors. The bond between warrior and scholar as the days passed. A bond formed between them, not of romance but of mutual respect and understanding. Mira, once skeptical, began to see Thomas not as weak but as someone capable of extraordinary strength through thought and patience. Why do you keep learning? She asked one evening as they cleaned their blades together. Because I must understand, he replied. The Vorn will come again. If we are to survive, we need to be ready. Strength alone will not win this war. Mira thought about her own training, her years of physical discipline, her mastery of weapons. And yet Thomas had achieved what she could not. He had controlled a weapon that was far beyond human limits. Perhaps we are stronger together, she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes calm but filled with determination. That is why I am here. Not to compete, not to dominate, But to protect, it was a statement of principle, and Mira realized that true strength was not about pride or victory. It was about responsibility. The Vorn returned then as they prepared the outpost for the inevitable next attack. The alarms blared again. The Vorn fleet was back, larger, faster, more heavily armed. Their ships cut through space like predators hunting prey. Mira's soldiers tensed. Many had seen Thomas wield the solar edge, but they knew the enemy's numbers were overwhelming. He stood beside her, golden blade glowing faintly. "We must be ready," he said. The battle began with firestorms across the skies. Plasma cannons lit the dark atmosphere. Explosions rocked the ground. The Vorn troops poured into the outpost, armored and relentless. Mira fought fiercely, as always. But this time she noticed something new. Thomas did not just wield the blade, he anticipated the enemy's moves. The solar edge moved almost of its own accord, deflecting attacks, cutting through armor, creating paths where soldiers could pass safely. It was as if the sword sang to him, responding to thought, intent, and courage. The turning point during the battle, a Vorn captain charged toward Mira, aiming to strike her down. She swung her blade, but the enemy was fast. Just as he raised his weapon to strike, Thomas appeared beside her. With a swift motion, the solar edge intercepted the attack, sending arcs of golden light across the battlefield. The enemy fell back, stunned. Mira stared at Thomas, awe mixing with disbelief. The human she had once thought weak had become a force she could rely on without question. You saved me," she said breathlessly. "I protect what I value," he replied. "Strength is not just for offense. It is for defense too." In that moment, Mira realized something profound. Thomas's power was not in his muscles or his speed. It was in his mind, his courage, and his willingness to act when others hesitated. Victory and respect. By the end of the battle, the Vorn forces were scattered. Their ships retreated and their troops were in disarray. The Aurelians had survived, thanks to the combined strength of their warriors and the unique power of a human with the solar edge. Mira stood amidst the ruins, watching Thomas quietly walk among the soldiers, offering advice, encouragement, and reassurance. The soldiers who had once mocked him now bowed slightly, their expressions a mix of respect and disbelief. Mira approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I see it now," she said softly. "You were never weak, you were patient, brave, and strong in ways we barely understand." Thomas smiled faintly, the golden sword pulsing softly in his hand. "Strength is not always what it seems," he replied. Mira nodded. For the first time she felt true admiration for the human beside her. Not pity, not surprise, admiration, a new understanding. The outpost was battered, but it had survived. The soldiers rested, the wounded were treated, and Thomas continued his work, not as a warrior, but as a strategist and protector. Mira stayed by his side, observing, learning, and finally understanding. The Aurelian way of strength was not wrong, but the human way and patience, focus, understanding could complement it, even surpass it in unexpected ways. Together they had formed a bond not of power, but of mutual respect. And as the twin suns rose over outpost Lyra, bathing the battlefield in golden light, Mira realized the truth. The solar edge had not just chosen Thomas, he had earned it, with thought, courage, and unshakable will, and that was a strength no Aurelian could ever ignore. The aftermath of the battle at Outpost Lyra left the air heavy with both relief and caution. Smoke still curled over the ruins and scorched metal glistened in the light of the twin suns. Soldiers moved carefully, inspecting the damage, repairing weapons, and checking shields. But the most unusual sight was Thomas, walking calmly among them, the golden solar edge glowing faintly in his hand. He was no longer just the human diplomat. He had become a symbol of hope, courage, and a strength Aurelians had never expected a human to possess. Mira followed him quietly, watching as soldiers bowed slightly in respect. Some whispered to one another, marveling at how a human had not just survived the battle but led them to victory in subtle, unexpected ways. Mira shook her head. She still couldn't believe it. The same man she had once thought weak now moved through the camp like a silent force, precise, measured, and unyielding. Returning to the capital after weeks at the outpost, It was time to return to Solara Prime. The High Council requested Thomas's presence immediately. They had heard reports of his actions and of the Solar Edge. Curiosity and caution mingled in their response. Mira and Thomas boarded the transport together. She sat silently, watching the human pilot maneuver through the atmosphere, while Thomas examined the core of the Solar Edge, ensuring its stability. "Are they ready to see what you can do?" Mira asked quietly. "They will have to be," Thomas replied. "Actions speak louder than words, and they have already spoken about the device. Now it is time for truth to be seen in person." Mira nodded slowly. The truth. That was something they both carried back with them, not as a claim to power, but as a demonstration of what humanity could achieve. The audience of the High Council. When they arrived at the capital, the council chambers were packed with the leaders of the Empire. Tall Aurelians in shining armor and flowing robes waited, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and subtle pride. Mira felt tension ripple through the room as Thomas stepped forward, the Solar Edge glowing faintly in his hand. "Human," one counselor began, his tone cold and sharp. "You have returned from a battlefield where our soldiers fought for their lives. Explain yourself. How did you succeed where others could not?" Thomas bowed politely. "I did not act alone. I learned, observed, and trusted in both the strength of your people and the abilities I could offer. The Solar Edge is a weapon of resonance when it responds to focus, to intent, to patience. I simply listened." There was a pause. Some counselors exchanged glances, unsure how to react. Mira stepped forward, her voice steady. "He is right. Many of you mocked him before. You thought a human could not survive, could not fight, could not lead, but he has proven otherwise. Not with raw strength, but with understanding, courage, and will." A silence filled the room. The High Council, which had always prized strength above all else, was confronted with something different, something Aurelians had never fully considered. Respect earned. The counselor who had spoken first straightened. "You speak with pride, warrior of Solara. Yet, what you describe is unusual. Can a human truly wield such a weapon and endure the pressures of war?" Thomas stepped forward, the sword humming faintly. "It is not just the weapon. It is the mind that guides it, the heart that decides, and the courage to act when others hesitate. I am human, and that is enough." The chamber was quiet, the council absorbing the meaning of his words. Another elder spoke softly. "Perhaps we have underestimated humans." Thomas nodded. "Perhaps, but now you have seen what patience, focus, and determination can achieve." Mira looked at him, her chest swelling with pride. He had done what she had never imagined. He had not only survived, he had changed the perception of an entire empire. The lesson of humanity. In the days that followed, the council began to reconsider their previous views on humanity. Reports spread of Thomas's actions at Outpost Lyra. Soldiers told stories of how he moved through battle calmly, directing others, controlling the Solar Edge with precision and thought, and protecting Aurelians who once doubted him. Mira watched these discussions quietly. She had fought in countless battles, led squads of elite warriors, and earned medals of honor. And yet she realized that Thomas's strength was different. Not better or worse, just unexpected. One evening, she found him alone in the observation deck of the palace, the city lights of Solara Prime reflecting in his thoughtful eyes. "You changed the council's mind," she said softly. He looked at her. "No, they saw what humans can do. I only showed them. The real change comes from understanding." Mira nodded. "And that understanding, it came from patience, not muscle, from courage, not pride, from your heart, not your hands." He smiled faintly. "Exactly. And perhaps that is a lesson not just for them, but for all of us." A united future, the Aurelian Empire had faced invaders, threats, and wars countless times. Strength had always been their measure of worth. Yet now they had seen something new. A human who combined intellect, patience, and courage to achieve the impossible. Mira and Thomas began working together, not only to defend the empire but to teach others the importance of combining strength and understanding. Soldiers trained not just with muscle but with focus. Leaders learned to listen before acting. The alliance between humans and Aurelians grew stronger, not because one was superior to the other, but because they complemented each other. Where Aurelians brought power, humans brought perspective. Where humans brought patience, Aurelians brought action. And at the center of it all stood Thomas, once thought weak. now recognized as a warrior in a new and profound way. Recognition and reflection. One day, the council formally honored Thomas. He did not seek titles or glory, but he accepted the acknowledgement of his achievements. "You have done more than survive," the High Council said. "You have shown the universe that strength comes in many forms, and you have proven that humans are not weak." Thomas bowed respectfully. "Thank you. I am honored. But the true victory belongs to all who fought together, to all who believed in unity over pride." Mira stood beside him, silently proud. She had learned a lesson she would never forget. Strength was not always visible. Sometimes it was quiet, patient, and almost invisible, yet stronger than any blade. The personal triumph that night, as they walked together along the illuminated streets of Solera Prime, Mira spoke softly. "I judged you unfairly," she admitted. "I thought you were weak. I didn't see what was inside you." He smiled. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I see it. And I respect it. More than I can say." They paused at the palace balcony looking over the city. Soldiers moved below, training and preparing, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place in their hearts and minds. "You changed more than the council," Mira whispered. "You changed the way we see humanity." Thomas looked at her. "I only did what humans do best. We endure, we learn, we act when needed, and we never give up." Mira nodded, her chest swelling with admiration. The quiet human she had once dismissed as weak had become her equal, not in muscle but in courage, in will, and in heart. The future of two worlds, the alliance between humans and Aurelians, continued to grow, strengthened by the lessons learned at Outpost Lyra and the courage of one human who refused to be underestimated. Soldiers trained together, sharing techniques of mind and body. Diplomats and leaders learned to value patience as much as power. And somewhere in the Empire, a quiet man with a golden sword walked among them, a symbol of what humanity could achieve when tested. Mira and Tomas remained partners in more ways than one. They were equals, each respecting the strengths of the other. They were examples of what could be accomplished when understanding and courage were combined with determination. And through it all, the solar edge pulsed quietly in Thomas's hand, a reminder that strength comes not just from muscle, but from the mind, the heart, and the refusal to surrender. A lasting truth in the end. Mira realized that the story of the battle was not just about defeating the Vorn Syndicate. It was about recognition, understanding, and the hidden power within humanity. She looked at Thomas, her human husband, the one she had once thought weak, and understood the truth fully. Strength is not only in the body, it is in the heart. It is in courage. It is in persistence. And humanity has it in abundance. And with that she smiled, knowing that together they could face any challenge, not just with swords but with will, courage, and the unity of two worlds.